What's up, YouTube? Adam Grover from Grover Boys Racing. I'm gonna do like a little tips and tricks deal with the foxbody Mustangs. Uh, I had fox bodies my whole life growing up. I grew up around them. Relatives had them, cousins, friends, my father's friends, whatever. All had them. My dad had them. Some of these guys ran NMRA circuit. A couple of my friends now run NMRA circuit, and they used to run like the factory stock classes or the Renegade. A couple people ran True Street and stuff. But as for me personally, I've had a couple cars I've done. One of them was a fuel injected Mustang that ran pretty well. The car was it was a notchback 89 with a speed density harness in it that somebody put in there. They did the 5.0 swap. It was a 4-cylinder car. They put a 5-speed in it. When I got the car, it was still had 7.5 rear in it, and it had vacuum leaks, exhaust leaks. The headers were rusty and had holes in them, stuff like that. The car was not too great. But long story short, that car ended up going 1270s, like a 1274. I think was my best pass at 104 mile an hour.
Oh, Daddy got him that time.
60 foot was trash. It was a 1.7 60 foot. I think 1.72 was the best number it ever got as far as the 60 goes. The car was basic. It had a cold air. It had shorty headers, equal lengths, X pipe, mufflers, tailpipes, factory suspension. The struts were drilled out in the front, actually. I had one that was seized, so I just drilled them and made the car where it was real loose in the front. And it had 430 gears and 28-inch by 10.5 slick Mickey Thompsons on it with a cow hood. There's a lift-off hood. Um, I think the front bumper support was out of it. The car had the heat in it. It had a mechanical fan on it. Power steering, no AC. Had the radio in it, leather seats in the front. The back seat was still cloth. I mean, full interior minus like carpet, because I never ended up putting carpet in the car. That's how I bought it. It was a project car that I drove daily, and I fixed stuff up as I went with it a little bit here and there, but my main focus was going fast because that's what I like to do. And 12s isn't that fast, but it's fast for what it was. I mean, this car was stock from the throttle body to pan minus the cold air, which was a BBK cold air, and the exhaust, like I mentioned, and the gears. I did put like slapper bars on it, which you still retain your factory control arms, but the bars just bolted to the rear and they just slapped the body. It did have subframe connectors in it. That's how I bought the car. It had a 6-point roll bar in it. Again, that's how I bought the car. So the chassis was kind of set up, but the 60 foot, a factory Mustang can 60 foot just as hard as what that one did. So the roll bar didn't really do much for it. It kept the car stable. The subframes prevented it from twisting. Not that it made it 60 foot any better, but the car, it ran good for what it was and it had a lot left in it. But I'm just using that as a reference so you guys kind of get the gist of, you know, I know little things to make the cars perform. I've had a couple factory cars with bolt ons go well in the 12s. I mean, with carburetor swaps and things like that. But factory E7s, stock bottom end 302s, no camshafts, stock rockers, and the one car actually went high 11s. The green Mustang, which is on my Facebook and my YouTube. I don't have the 11-second passes on here, but on my Facebook, it's plastered over 82 Deck Mafia. You know, if you search my name, Adam Grover, on 82 Deck Mafia Facebook page, it'll pop up. You'll see where the car went in the 11s and all the accomplishments of that build. So, getting into this, I have a whole page listed for fuel injection guys. What you can do if you get a factory Mustang and you want to start doing little things to make it perform better. Some of the stuff's mass air related, some of it's speed density related. Personally, I I like speed density, so 86 to 88 is, you know, great for a factory style build. Mass air stuff, you know, you can run pretty good with it too. It's not a make or break deal. So 89 to 93, you can make it happen. If it is an 89 to 93 car, they had a silencer on the mass air meter. So on the inlet of the mass air, they had like a screen. You could pop that screen off. It's like 1 horsepower, but 1 horsepower plus 1 horsepower is 2. So you can see where I'm going. The factory air box is actually really good. The inlet tube sucks. They dry out because they're rubber. So you can replace that with either a plastic 90 off of the throttle body into the factory box, or you can use like a BBK, you know, elbow and make it work, adapt it. If it is a bone stock car, I believe they have a boot on them, if I remember correctly. It's been a long time since I messed with the stock, since I've seen a stock airbox with the whole assembly. But I believe they have like a rubber boot that comes off the inlet and it like necks down real small. You can take that off. And if you want to modify something where it has like a ram air effect, where it goes like underneath the car or to the headlight, that'll work. They like ram air. If you can ram air into that intake, the car will go faster, guaranteed. Throttle body, a cheap throttle body for these cars, if you're keeping the factory intake and stuff, Explorer. They have a 65 millimeter throttle body. I'm not sure if it's a specific year, but I had one a while back. I measured it in all, 65 millimeter. So if you don't want to do like an intake change and you just want to do a little something to make the car wake up, the throttle body will definitely help it, going with a 65 millimeter throttle body. And it's not oversized. The 65 will work fine. You can go plenty fast with the 55 millimeter. Like I said, I went 12s with one. So, you know, it depends how aggressive you want to be with the car. And I'm going to get into that on this list. Everybody does exhaust. So, off-road, X-pipe would be your best bet. But anything 2.5 inch for a factory style build. Long tubes preferably if you can get them. Shorties, they'll work. Tailpipes, not a make or break situation. The car is not going to pick up taking the tailpipes off of it. It's mainly if you have a crazy restricted exhaust system. The headers suck on the factory Mustangs. So headers are probably the biggest killer. That and the cats with the resonators, how the factory H-pipe has like the 2 resonators and the 2 cats on it. Get rid of that, off-road. And then factory mufflers, you could probably even use them and keep the 2 1/4 if you really wanted to. I don't think it would hurt it. You're not making crazy power with a factory Fox body. It's just not going to happen. They make 225 doing this stuff. You're going to make, you know, maybe 275, maybe. Um, Going back to the Explorer stuff, Explorer upper and lower intake. If you want to get into an intake change, take the whole intake and swap the whole intake. It's basically like a GT40 or Cobra, similar. The lowers are the same. The Explorer actually makes better power. Like 2 horsepower difference between the tubular GT40, the Cobra, and the Explorer. The Explorer is the best one. In the power band, I think the Cobra made 2 horsepower at like somewhere in 6,000 RPMs. You can Google it and look up the test. I think it's like GT40 shootout or something, intake shootout. But they have all 3 intakes. They dynoed them. They were really close. The tubular one was the worst one. The Explorer one was the best one, and the Cobra peaked 2 horsepower in like the 6,000 RPM range. So it's, don't think you need a Cobra intake. The Explorer one actually works the best. The ugliest one. You could also, if you find an F-150, if I'm not mistaken, the lower intake with the square ports, they are staggered. You can get a Holley Systemax upper that will bolt right on that. So if you come across the Holley Systemax upper, go to a junkyard, find an old F-150 like 8950 Bronco with a 302 in it. And you can get the lower intake manifold and bolt that whole setup together. Some of the trucks didn't have them, but look for that square staggered port, not the inline port. It'll be square and staggered. It'll look like a Holley Systemax port. And that's something to save you a little bit of money if you have the budget, or you find, like I said, a Holley Systemax upper alone cheap, and then you buy, if you can find a lower. The EGR, block that off. No need for it. There's an EGR tube that goes from head to head on the back. You can take that, cut the tube off, you flip the plates around that bolt to the head, and you silicone them and put the bolts back in them, and it's blocked off that easy. I make deletes for the EGR myself. I just get a piece of sheet metal and pull that big EGR valve off the EGR spacer by the throttle body. I just make a block off plate with that. There's coolant lines that run through that. It's got they come off the coolant tubes, and rubber hose goes into the EGR. I've actually taken those hoses and ran them together, but you can pull the hoses off and weld the tubes or cap them. Some people put caps on them. I've actually taken a brass fitting and put them together with clamps. That way the water runs through the tubes and the rubber hoses, but not the intake. What that does, that's to heat the intake up. So when you go to the track, you make one pass with the car, say 160 degrees, that intake's 160 degrees. So now your air coming in, say you got a nice cool day, 50 degrees outside, your air coming in now is getting hot because the intake's hot. Cooler you can keep the intake, cooler a charge into the motor, more power. Bypass that. 160 thermostat. Take the thermostat out. They usually come with a 190 factory. Put a 160 in it. All stupid. This is all stupid, cheap stuff. This is for if you're a younger guy, you saved all your money, you bought a Fox body, and you don't have the money. This is good stuff to do to get some performance out of it. Stupid stuff, but it's effective. You can do things like electric fans. Take the mechanical fan off, put an electric fan on. AC doesn't really rob power, but it is weight. So if you're trying to get weight out of the car, that's the cheapest thing you can do is take weight out of one of these cars, and it's effective. 100 pounds on this car is roughly a tenth or more, depending on what the car is. If it's bone stock, the more you take, it'll pick up. Spare tire and jack, I think, is like 50 or 75 pounds. It's pretty heavy, depending what spare you have. But pull all that stuff out. The spare tire and jack, you shouldn't even be racing the car with that stuff in it. That stuff take out right at the track and make a pass with the car. But like a fiberglass hood, put a fiberglass hood on the car. Most people like cow hoods on them. If you like a stock hood, what I did is I bought a hardwood pin-on hood, and I pinned it to the factory hinges, so it's still open and closed like stock, but I had to pin the front. So for people who don't like pins, it sucks, but I like hood pins. It's a safety thing with me. So I bought a pin-on hood and made it work. Um, Underdrive crank pulley. You can do underdrives for the water pump and the alternator if you want. I like doing just the crank. Um, I think you get a better gain out of it that way. But these are minuscule things. You're not going to put an underdrive on the car, make a pass, and see a substantial difference. I mean, if it's a tenth, but the stocker the car is, the more this stuff makes a difference. The less horsepower you have, the more this matters. So anything that can rob power off that engine, if you don't want it or need it, take it off. The smog pump, that's the first thing I usually take off if it has it. That thing can get tossed right in the trash. Anything smog related goes in the trash. EPA might come after me after this video, but timing. There's multiple ways of doing timing on these cars, but you always, to check them with a light, you got to mark the balancer. I mark it at 0. I always find the 0 on the balancer. These cars are getting older now, so you want to verify that the timing's correct. You don't have to go crazy, but you can usually tell if it's way out and stuff. It'll ping and do stupid stuff, and you can tell if the balancers are spun. So you always look at the rubber on the balancer, make sure it's not cracked, things like that. But I'll take like a silver Sharpie or a white paint marker, mark the balancer at 0, pull the spout or the pip, whatever you want to call it, the little square thing that goes by the distributor, pull that out, and that's going to be your base timing. With that out, your timing is now locked out, so there's no curve. Factory's 10 degrees. I don't even know what the pip really adjusts it up to. I never cared because I keep the pip out of them. I'll take the spout and I put it in the glove box or the center console inside the car. And I set my timing to 36 degrees total. And I run 87 octane. I don't put anything more in them. The car is low compression. It's 9-1. There's no reason to put higher octane fuel. We've actually seen cars slow down, and they've had minuscule work done, intake, carburetor, exhaust, things like that. They've actually slowed down with 93 in these. There's no reason. It's a harder fuel to burn. You're not detonating, you don't need it. So unless you got compression, the timing's way off. I mean, like I just said, I've run as much as 40 degrees, my father too, 40 degrees of timing on 87 octane fuel, no pinging, no knocking, no spark knock, nothing. And I mean, we've had the plugs gap pretty wide, 45, thousands. So don't worry about putting high test fuel in it. Run 87. You'll actually go faster. Um, Gearing, you always see the guys 355s, 373s. I want to drive it on the street. And I'm going to have guys tear me up for this. I run a lot of gear. I like gear. If I want to go fast, that street stuff, if the car can do 60 mile an hour, I'm content. That car shouldn't be going faster than that. If I'm on a slick with a spool, because these are the things that I do. I set the car up so that way I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and things. So, gearing is a big thing. Um, Unless you drive hard and know how to slip a clutch, gearing makes it a little easier, and it's easier on parts. So the more gear you can put in it, the more it'll actually save the life of the car. And that's the same with weight. Weight and gear help save parts and clutch, a weak clutch. A lot of guys, they get these cars, the first thing they do, they put a I've seen guys put spec stage 3 clutches. There is no need for a clutch that aggressive. There's no need to have a dual disc, crazy 1,000 horsepower clutch in a car that makes 3, even 400 horsepower. I had a center force dual friction in my car and went nines. And the car, yeah, it was light. Yes, it had gear, like I just said. But it's been in the car since 2017. Till it's actually still in the car now. But I mean, tons of street passes, driving it on the street, around. There's no reason to go with like a crazy clutch. An AutoZone clutch, for someone that's got the mods that I've listed so far, is all you need. And actually, the mods that I'm going to go over to go 12s with one of these cars, there's no need to put any more clutch. Even 11s, 10s, AutoZone clutch. It used to be $85. They're probably like $120 now because of inflation. No need to go anything more than that. AutoZone clutch, gear. I like a 430, and then I put a taller tire on it to pull the gear back down. So I'll use like a 430 gear with a 28-inch tall tire because I like a tall tire. Some people don't like tires rubbing, so you can use a 28x9. I use a 28-10-5. I pound the crap out of the inner wheel wells, and I cut the lips. And my car sat pretty low. It used to tuck tire. Um, but they will rub. You're going to take anything 10 inches wide is going to rub on these cars. It doesn't matter if it's a 26-inch tire or a 28. If it's a 10 wide, it's going to rub. When you take corners and things like that, hard bump, corner, that's foxbody nature. Don't like it, then you got to run either a 28x9 with the lips trimmed, or you have to run a 26x8.5 or 8, whatever they are. Quad shocks come off, to fit a tire like that. Some people flip them. I always take that stuff off. Sway bars come off. I don't keep none of that. All that stuff's dead weight. Some people like the rear sway bar. I take them off too because there's no need for the way I set suspension and stuff up. That factory little rear sway bar isn't going to do much, to be honest. I've been plenty fast without it, so I don't need it. Tire size and gearing go together. If you're using a 28-inch tire, put more gear in it. If you're using a 26-inch tire, you can get away with a little bit less gear. For instance, a 430 with a 28-inch tall tire is almost equal to like a 390 with a 26-inch tire. So you might say, well, why didn't you just use a 390 with a 26-inch tire? Don't have to worry about it rubbing. Don't have clearance issues. I like using the gear for leverage. That gear is going to turn that tire easier than pulling the gear out and turning a smaller tire. So I rather have the torque, essentially, because that's what gear does, it multiplies torque. I rather have the torque going to the wheels and have to power that tire. So that's just the way I look at it. I look at it as leverage. Suspension. There's a couple different ways of doing suspension. Like I told you, I went 1270s with drilled out struts and slapper bars. That is not ideal suspension, but I was broke at the time. I couldn't afford good stuff. But suspension is a big thing to making these cars go. If the car don't hook, it doesn't matter how much power you have. It's useless. I'd rather have a car low on horsepower that dead hooks and works and 60 foots hard than a high horsepower car that can't put it to the ground. Just that simple. So suspension is key. So the best way I found out to do it is UPR sells tubular control arms, and I'm not sponsored by anybody. I'm just here to help tell people what works. UPR made a kit. At the time, it was like $300. Adjustable solid uppers, adjustable solid lowers. And when I say solid, it means it has no polyurethane bushings. They're solid bushing control arms. And these are stick shift cars that I'm talking about at the moment. With a stick car, you want solid stuff. The ride goes away, the cars start to creak, they rattle. If you're racing one of these cars and you're serious about it, you don't want poly in it at all. Poly rips through time, and you can actually wreck the car over ripping out something that holds your rear end. So it turns into a safety thing, and it's one of those things where you got to figure out what you want to do with your car. But solid suspension, that UPR kit is great. And I buy a rebuild kit for Southside UMI lift bars. And the rebuild kit comes with instant center brackets. Now, if you know anything and you're into this, you're going to ask, well, why wouldn't you just buy instant center brackets? And this is why. The Southside ones, they might only have one hole in them, but they are $60 for that rebuild kit compared to $100, $150 for a set of like adjustable, crazy style instant center brackets. So I use the Southside stuff. You do have to cut the control arms and make them fit. It's not that big of a deal because you're solid bushing. So the bushings and the ears get cut a little shorter so that way they fit in the brackets. It does lower the car down. So I use a factory rear spring, stock length, not cut, and that's how I do that. And the car sits nice. It tucks the tire beautifully, and it looks good. That's what's on my green Mustang, the one that went nines. And they give you a nice anti-squat value, especially if you do like a baseline upper control arm, but that stuff gets expensive. So this is like the most budget-friendly way of doing it that works really good. I've been on motor 1.5 60 foots and on spray in the 1.3s, and that's with a relatively factory 302. The 1.5 was a factory 302 with intake carb exhaust, and that's it. Little tricks done with timing and things like that, but car was pretty basic. Um, Getting back to the fuel injected stuff, fuel pressure regulator. I like to go with an adjustable one. So like a BBK one, they're nice. Um, the factory one, they used to say the old trick was you pull the vacuum off of it and block it off, so that way you don't have a vacuum leak. Block the intake off, and it'll give you like 50 pounds of fuel pressure. So it gives you a little bit more fuel pressure if you need it. Going along with that, I like to put a wideband in the car. AEM makes a pretty cheap one. They're like $130. Get them on Amazon. Comes with everything. Um, they work well. And that's going to tell you a lot with tuning. You can look at that gauge and you'll know if you need a fuel pressure regulator, bigger injector, whatever. Fuel pump, the old school way is 255. They make different pumps now that are better, 340 stealth, things like that. But 255 is still a good pump. For someone who's on a budget, finds one used for like $50 or $25. Some people give them away. They're good pumps. They're great with these cars. Gauges, I like a shift light at least. I also like tack, on the dash. That's just the foxbody way for me. But I like a tack with a shift light. A lot of people say that the factory tacks are off. I've seen some accurate ones, but a tack with a shift light. A stick car usually likes to be shifted at like 5,800. A factory, intake to pan style deal or bolt on deal with a stock cam. They don't like to spin up real high. Spoiler, if it's a hatch car, spoiler will make a difference. If you're trying to get every tenth out of this thing, if you're going 13,000, pull the spoiler off. Passenger seat out, like I said, weight. The spoiler actually is drag. It's not so much weight because they're not that heavy. A spoiler isn't 100 pounds. Usually it's typically 100 pounds for a tenth. But the spoiler, I had a Cobra wing on my car, and it did go like a tenth faster, taking the wing off the car. And that's why the green Mustang doesn't have a wing on it, because I actually like the Cobra wing, and it's actually probably going to go back on the car. But pulling the wing off did make a difference. Going back to clutches and stuff, I kind of skipped over this. A quadrant and a firewall adjuster is a must on a stick shift car. That stuff matters. If you want the car to go fast and you need to drive the car, shift it hard, launch it, have a little bit of slip off the start, a firewall adjuster is a big deal with adjustable cable and everything. 1.7 Cobra rockers, unless you have valve springs, forget it. Or if you have a low mileage motor, they might help. People claim a tenth. I had upgraded valve springs, and honestly, I think I saw a bigger gain putting them on the intake side than running them all the way across. On the green Mustang, I didn't even run them. The car that went 11s, they weren't worth the hassle to me or the money. So I would save my money and put it towards something else, especially now that this stuff's going up, like the crane rockers and stuff, the factory Cobra rockers. They're getting harder to find. Proform, I think, makes a bolt-on set that you can buy, like 1.7s, but really there's no reason to even upgrade the rockers, period, until you're spinning the engine high, like 6,500 plus. E7s versus GT40s and GT40P heads. I saved this one kind of for last. We're starting to get to the end of the list. It's like a couple more things. But GT40 heads, if you're just going to bolt on an Explorer P head or a Cobra / Explorer GT40 head, regardless which one it is, 3 or 4 bar, it's maybe a tenth or two of a difference. There might be some guys that come in on here and disagree with that, but unless you upgrade the valve springs, if you are bolting them on and leaving them factory, they are not worth the hassle. And I, like, along with the E7s, with the 1.7 rockers, valve springs. Valve train is everything. You might not have a cam that turns up real high. Explorers have a weaker cam than a Mustang does. Any of the trucks, they're weak. They're not that great. I think they're made for like 4,800 RPM. So the valve spring isn't made to turn 6,000 RPM. And like I told you, a Mustang, a factory HO cam is good around 5,800. That's where you shift them at. I've spun a factory cam to 6,400 just to see what it does. I've actually spun them higher, but, you know, and some cars like different shift RPM. You can get away with it through certain gears, depending on the gearing and stuff. It's something you got to mess with. But the GT40 heads, MP heads, if you're leaving them factory, don't even waste your time, money. They're not even worth the money and gaskets if somebody hands you a set. It's not worth your time to put those on unless you just want a tenth, because that's really all you're going to gain. The car might feel a little bit better. It might fry the tires off in that low RPM band, but they're not worth it. You can go just as fast with an E7. I promise you. I've beat GT40 headed cars a lot. I've gone faster than a lot of GT40 headed cars with E7s. Now, who's to say that I didn't get a set of GT40s and do the stuff to them I wouldn't pick up? I most likely would, because they are a better head. But you need to do the valve springs and the stuff that they need to make them work to the best of their ability. Same with the E7 as well. Now, when I say I went 11s with E7s, they were factory, untouched E7s with factory valve springs, factory rockers, factory push rods, lifters, the whole deal. So, when I say you need to do things to make the stuff better, when we ported the heads, the car went from 1180s to 1150s by porting the heads with good valve springs. I did, however, put good valve springs on that 1180 combo to spray it, and the car didn't go any faster on motor because of where I was shifting it. I didn't need the valve springs because they weren't floating. They were strong enough. So the car doesn't necessarily need them. If you're not turning crazy RPM and you're not floating the valves, sometimes you don't always hear it. Depends how drastic it is. But my main point is the GT40 headed stuff, people blow it way out of proportion. They're not needed. You don't need it to go 12s. You don't need it to go 13s. If you're going 13s with a factory Fox body and you have GT40s, you are doing something wrong. I am sorry. I'm being blunt. I'm being honest. I'm not out to hurt feelings, but truth hurts sometimes. Unless it's an AOD car with a factory converter. But stick shift on a tire, setup, no. Shouldn't do it. And I've seen it. I've seen people do it. Mid-13s with that combination. And that's horrible. Factory block, stock bottom end, strokers, the whole thing with the 500 horsepower braking at 500. Back in the day, yes. Technology's come a long way. People have learned to tune. A lot of that block breaking is tuning. It's detonation. And it's rattling the block to pieces. And it makes them split. You can make the block live. Is it worth doing a stroker on a stock block? Yes. If it's a motor piece. If you want to stay on motor, then yeah, you can do a stroker setup. If you're going to spray it, eventually it's going to break. It might break first pass. And it depends how much you're hitting it with. Or if you put a blower or turbo, it's eventually going to break. They are a weak block. They have many flaws. Ben Almeida, I might have pronounced his last name wrong, but he's on here. He talks about it. He talks about why they're weak. Very informational video. They do split, but I went 9s with mine and it's living. Light car, gear, anything that doesn't make that thing detonate, doesn't overload the engine and make it work, helps. You might say, well, how does gear help with that? It doesn't put a load on it. You don't have as much of a load. Sorry. You don't have as much of a load pulling the engine down and making that thing work harder for it to detonate. The harder that engine works, the closer it gets to detonation. Take that away, take the load off, make that car where it's easy to go down the track. That helps. That's why it helps taking power steering off. AC. Yeah, the AC don't rob nothing, but it's weight. Anything weight related or that turns a pulley, it's an extra pulley you don't have to spin. Why spin it if you're not going to use it? There's no reason. Aluminum heads. Going back to GT40s, I'm kind of jumping around. I'm sorry, it's a little disorganized, but aluminum heads make a drastic difference. If you have a 14-second car and you put aluminum heads on it, it might go 13s or get into the 12s. And you'll say, man, that made a big difference. And you'll think, we're good. And this is the problem with a lot of Mustang guys. And I had a buddy of mine, kind of picking on me a little bit the other day. And he goes, why does everybody swap Mustangs? Why don't they just use the Ford motors if the Ford motors are so great and they're so easy to make go fast? Because they are. And I said the reason is because people don't know what they're doing and they throw parts at them. And that is a big mistake. Throwing parts at something, I could throw parts at any motor and make it run. And because it goes from 16s to 13s, I picked up 3 seconds. It looks great on paper. Oh, I gained 3 seconds. I did heads, cam, intake, and that's great. But when you know how an engine, what it flows, and you look at it from like an air pump perspective, scientifically, and I'm not even that into that stuff, but you realize that an engine should perform a certain way when it has a cylinder head that flows X amount and how fast the air can move through that head. It's not always about what it flows. It's about how fast it can get it there as well, velocity. You can have a head that flows with no velocity and the thing will be a dog. Or you can have a head with a lot of velocity and no flow, and usually the outcome's a little bit better, but it could still be a dog. Because the port's too small and the engine, once it's calling for more, you're smothering it at that point. It's trying to pull the air in and it's getting air quickly through it, but it can't do nothing with it because it's just out of breath. So my point is, you could throw a set of heads on a 14-second car, go 12s, and it looks great. And it makes you feel good and warm and fuzzy. But you can go 12s with a factory style setup. stock engine, so to speak. Because the stuff I just listed to do, that's still a factory engine. Freeing up that power, you're not modifying the engine. You're letting the engine do what the engine's supposed to do. The engine didn't come with accessories when they built it. The engine was just an engine. Ford put the accessories on so that way you would have comfort, easier driving, and smog for the EPA. And your alternator so that way, everything charges. The alternator is really the only one that's needed. The water pump, you could put electric water pump on it, drive it around. I've daily driven electric water pumps. Corvettes have them stock. So there's really, to free that engine up, it's a big deal. And it still is a stock motor. Exhaust. The engine's still stock. That's still a factory engine, even though you put headers on it. Some of these guys take this stock deal and, well, because it came from Ford, and you took those little pinched off headers that Ford put on them for smog, you took those off and you put these bigger headers on it to let it breathe and let the engine pump air through it. You modified it. It's no longer stock. The engine itself is still a stock long block engine. A long block is from the rockers down. Not necessarily the intake, but when you order a long block from Jegs, it comes with the rockers to the pan. It doesn't come with exhaust. It doesn't come with an intake manifold. It doesn't come with accessories. So therefore, your engine is a factory engine. It's still a stock engine. Even with, if you get an Explorer intake, it's a factory Ford intake. Still stock engine. Put that 65mm Explorer throttle body on it. Still factory engine. You took all the accessories off. Factory engine. Put an underdrive pulley on it. It's a factory engine. If you want to get real technical, okay, boom, I put an underdrive pulley on it. Pull the belt off. There you go. Factory engine. Now there's no pulleys running. People used to do that. They said it was worth a tenth. They also used to say the exhaust being opened up was worth a tenth, but I never seen a difference with that. But this video ran a little bit longer than what I anticipated, but I wanted to go over all this stuff. It's all good information to know. Hopefully you guys can make it through to the end if you care that much. But I appreciate you guys watching. If you like this, hit the like button, subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later. Have a good one. Good luck if any of you guys follow this advice. I'll see you.